Hi everyone, John Eben here with the Apartment Association of California Southern Cities with another wonderful podcast. We have James Mayfield, President, Chief Engineer, and Director of Operations. James, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to be here. It's a breath of fresh air because we've been in the desert all week, demolishing meth labs and cleaning up fentanyl residue, and Tyvek and respirators.
So tell me, James, what is it that you and your company do?
Okay, so we are a two-generation hazardous waste business out of Southern California and across the 50 states, doing all services related to hazardous waste, environmental stewardship, soil sampling, air monitoring, tank removal, cartel cleanups, meth lab cleanups, homeless encampment cleanups, trucking, disposal, grading, excavation, anything you can imagine.
So anything that is dirty, right, that needs specialization, right? We're not talking about simple stuff, but the nasty stuff, you're able to safely remove it and dispose of it for folks.
We love it. We love it. Murder cleanups, suicide cleanups, we love it.
You can clean it all. That's fantastic. Well, look, I think part of the reason why we're talking today, we know each other socially, and I got to spend some time with you, and I really was just sort of wowed and amazed by some of the prevailing topics as it relates to the Pasadena fires and Altadena fire. But before we go there, if we could, just give us a little bit of context and background. How did you, I know that you have a lot of different expertise. What got you into this? Sort of what's your origin story? Are you a Long Beach guy? Are you like, what is your background and just what you're willing to share with us, how you got to where you are today?
Yes, I'm born and raised in Long Beach, went to Wilson, went to Cal State Long Beach, on to Stanford. I got 2 master's degrees, professor for 13 years. Like I said, it's a two-generation business. So my dad did 30 years of hazardous waste before me as Mayfield Enterprises. He had the unfortunate mispleasure to walk into the Cerritos air disaster in 1986. Oh. That's when 2 planes collided over Cerritos and killed over 60 people. He walked in there, cleaned up the hazardous waste, the jet fuel, the dead bodies. One thing led to another. And 15 years ago, I took over that company, expanded ever since. And we've been doing every kind of niche market that no one else is willing to do. Radioactive waste, murder, suicide, whatever. And now fire disasters were on our doorstep, and we came equipped to bring not only demolition, but hazardous waste, chemistry knowledge, the wisdom to do the job properly and comprehensively that our competitors could not do.
Does that include like remediation as well?
Yes.
Okay. So let's talk about it. So, I think what was very interesting about this crisis is although it happened to our neighbors, unless you went there, you have no context.
No.
And people kind of just moved on with their merry, unlike like an earthquake where everyone in the region was impacted. This was sort of a very large geographical area, but kind of confined to one area. And I very early on took a tour, and it looked like, and the gentleman next to me was like, this is what Dresden looked like. This is what like a bombed out neighborhood would look like. And I have a very, as we all know, I've had several friends who one had a house in Malibu, one in Pacific Palisades, who literally was standing because his geo Ben said, you are in front of your house, but had no frame of reference, a tree, a neighbor, like no frame of reference of where he was at all. He said, you could have put me anywhere, USA. I was not in front of my house because of the absolute decimation of the neighborhood.
Even the addresses painted on the curb were illegible when we tried to figure out which address we're working on. Yeah.
So I think what's interesting is for a lot of people, they're a little disconnected as to what actually happened and the absolute terrible thing that happened to people. The other thing that I think is a misnomer is that these are people who, just like in Long Beach where you have like 3rd generation, Bixby Knoll or 3rd generation in the same house kind of thing. A lot of the folks that are my friends that were impacted were teachers, were, young medical professionals that moved in. And, my parents happened to live in West Hollywood. They happened to live in the Palisades. And obviously the Palisades values have increased exponentially over others. But a lot of the folks that live there are now aged out. They're retired, but they lost all of their wealth because it was in their house. They didn't have monetary wealth. They happened to live in a place that was wealthy, but it's not like when we think about, these are millionaires and billionaires. No, these are teacher pensions. These are nurses. These are doctors. These are also professionals who are we're aging out in that population. When you find that would be most of the demographics or a lot of it.
All kinds. We had all kinds of celebrities, NBA stars in the Palisades in particular. On the Altadena side, we did a lot of work in Altadena, and these are retired people with very limited income. Several times they wouldn't even return for several months to even respond to the nuisance violations from the county. They just couldn't process it. And when they did, they had no money to pay me, or they didn't file the paperwork in time because they're just not entirely.
Well, that's because it was an emotional crisis. Yeah. It didn't seem like the government was there to help. So let's talk about it. So fire happens, abject crisis, and I believe, what was your first kind of call for service? What were you brought into? What did you see? Tell us a little bit about the days and months after the fire and what you were seeing on the ground.
Okay, let me start with 2 disclaimers, if I may. So first of all, we were the largest private hazmat contractor in both the Palisades and Altadena, so that we operated outside of the infrastructure of the Army Corps and the government response. We were an Army vendor, so we got the communiques from the Army and from the private client, so we saw both sides of it. And we were the only hazmat contractor there in the very beginning, at the end, after the cleanup, and we're the only private hazmat contractor still there remediating homes. So that gives me a larger, more commensurate picture of the disaster from start to finish. Number 2, I want to say that with some wisdom I've developed over the years, it's very easy to pick fall guys. And as I'm in the field talking to these frustrated homeowners, it's very typical for me to want to blame Karen Bass or Gavin Newsom. And I think all parties involved deserve significant amounts of blame. But I'm not a politician, so I don't pretend to know all the machinations that limited them in their responses. So all I know is what I've seen, and I think objectively we can agree that it's a complete disaster and a failure from start to finish. Continuing to be.
Yeah.
And it's been declared a success story, and everybody left, except us largely, in the hazmat capacity. It's a failure in every single level.
Yeah, and I think what was interesting is there was an outburst of support regionally, but they literally had no systems in place. So like people were like loading up trucks of water and food and driving out, and people over there were asking us to stop. They're like, please stop, bring us, we need money. We don't need water or food. We need people to help get housed. But there was no orchestration. Look, I think governments are meant to be there when that moment occurs and have their kind of their stuff together. I think it was a failure of our federal system and our local system, and it continues to be so. There does not seem to be a leadership saying, this is my responsibility, I'm going to take it to the finish line. I think a lot of people want, and I'm just objectively saying this, they want to help, but they just don't know how best to help. So I think what I hope is that we can provide a little bit of insight, a little bit of on the ground, what's happening, and maybe some out of the box thinking on how we can maybe address some of the situations going forward.
And I failed to answer your question. Why did I get involved?
Yeah, how did you get involved? What was the first thing you did when you first got over there? Yeah. So, but I think we needed those disclosures. I think it's important context.
We were there the very first day that homeowners were allowed back. So even before the homeowners were even allowed to know whether or not their property was gone, because Google Earth wasn't current. You couldn't zoom in and see it. In fact, Google Maps didn't show the devastation until weeks later, if not months. So they were calling us saying, I know my house is damaged. Can you at least remediate it? Can you help me? I want to move back in. And I would say, I'll do my best, but the political processes are not in place for me to let alone be allowed into the city itself, let alone to help you. I can't bring my tractors there at my own expense when I can't clean anything. All the landfills will not accept your hazardous waste. So it was very frustrating on their part and mine that I could not help them quick enough.
It was like a few weeks, right? They wouldn't let people back after, it was like almost a month.
Yeah.
And they wouldn't even let, I think there was sensitivity. I called them, what did I call them? Like tragedy tourists, where people like to take selfies in front of like burned out cars and stuff, which is mind numbing. So they get in there. It clearly described for me the scene. So you have these fires that burn paint cans, aerosol, oil drums. Yeah. There's all sorts of machinations of sort of environmental hazards. And then I believe about a month after the fires, there was rains. Yeah. And I remember watching on TV these sludge just kind of moving like this down, a lot of it going into the water, and thinking to myself, what a second disaster. It's almost like we should have declared a second disaster, because what was happening was essentially all of that loose hazardous materials, instead of it being like where it was burned and where you have to go clean it up, now is disseminated all over the place.
Yeah.
City, streets, sidewalks, parks, open space, maybe land that it wasn't theirs to begin with, but it was 2 doors down, but it moved into their slot. Now they have to deal with it. So it's almost like there was a second emergency about a month afterwards.
Yeah.
And I know that there was Army Corps of Engineers that came out that were supposed to clean the properties. Tell me a little bit about what you saw. So after these rains, and now they were trying to do remediation, and then didn't the city set up some sort of like, you have until this date to do this, you have until this date to do that. Meanwhile, these people are totally devastated. They don't have clothes, their personal items, and they're living in a hotel. And they're supposed to like fill out forms from the government, right?
The first thing to understand is that the Palisades was essentially on military lockdown. So that was completely locked down, during which time all this political meandering went along for several weeks. That's when you had the rains hit. So you had almost all of the hazardous waste right on the coastline washed directly into the ocean. Altadena, however, was completely wide open. Absolutely anyone could walk in there. Homeowners can go back in and walk through their own homes and get potentially exposed to noxious fumes or hazardous waste combustion byproducts. Within only a few days, you had people going in and looting. First week after the fire, I was there and I saw signs saying, "If you loot, we shoot." There were no restrictions at all in Altadena.
It was like, okay, it was like the Wild West.
And that nurtured very early on. You see, the social attitude in Altadena is very different. There's immense bitterness and resentment. It's taking on a lot of political connotations there because you have different demographics. They feel that they're neglected, perhaps because they have more African Americans there, more Hispanics. You see these protests happening recently. Palisades, to them, was treated differently.
Well, it was. It sounds like if it was on like a lockdown and the other one wasn't, that sounds pretty much a difference, right?
Right. So then to jump back into it, you said the Army came back in. So this is the first thing the public does not understand, and they were not told this information properly. The Army came in and they subbed it out to ECC. Now, ECC is a disaster management company. Well, we work with them sometimes, so I'm not throwing them under the bus. They were under-equipped, like anyone else would be, to settle on a disaster with 15,000 burned homes. I couldn't do it. The governor couldn't do it. So the Army subcontracted out to private vendors, a lot of unions, mostly paving companies with absolutely no experience or any staff trained in hazardous waste management. They did not have the labor force that could adequately endure the training to wear respirators and know how to protect themselves. So all kinds of people started coming there. A lot of them were illegal immigrant labor. I turned around and I saw a lot of people, and I said, that sounds like French. And I realized it's Haitian Creole. They're refugees being staffed. I heard a lot of Spanish with a certain accent that I realized those are Venezuelan refugees. Now, those people, as hardworking as they are, have no training in asbestos, no training in hazardous waste. I even lost an employee. He moved on. And he told me, "Boss, I got a job with the other company that will not be named, and I'm doing asbestos." I said, "I just laid you off a week ago. I didn't train you in that. Who trained you in asbestos?" He said, "Oh, they told us at the back of a truck this morning." This is not exaggeration. So I said, "Do you understand that in 40 years, you're now at risk of asbestosis?" He said, "No, they didn't tell us that." So there was such a speed and urgency to do this as quickly as possible. What was it, 6 months? That these are the disastrous ramifications you see.
So are you saying that not only people who are untrained, but also ill-equipped in terms of personal protection on cleaning up the sites?
Right. So
did you see it firsthand?
Firsthand. I was there every step of the way. So we have staff who have been dealing with the Lahaina fire. They've been dealing with the Paradise fire. So we have a lot of experience with disaster response. This is the only major disaster, despite being the largest disaster of its kind, where there was almost no soil testing, almost no environmental testing, almost no safety oversight, and almost no vetting of the contractors being involved. None. Zero.
Okay. And I have to ask, if they were not trained and not equipped, could they have done a good job actually remediating and cleaning it up? So no.
That's why what I'm doing now is I'm going and scraping the front lawns of hundreds of homes in Altadena because they only took 2 inches of dirt, even though the public going to the disaster response center was told that the Army and its vendors would take 6 inches. I watched them. They took 0 to 3 at most on most properties. It's absolutely improper.
So are you finding at a place that was cleared by the government, you're finding contaminants still there?
Hundreds. So we demolished close to 300 homes, burnt homes in Altadena and the Palisades. I've tested almost 3,000. And of the tests, these are properties that were cleared by the Army Corps and its vendors. I'd say at least 30% still well exceed the federal or state lead limits. So anything over...
Today?
Yes, today, now.
Of a cleared property?
After it's cleared and over. So anything over 80 milligrams of lead, 80 parts per million, is in excess of the California standards for lead. I have properties up to 400. It's crazy. That's twice the federal limit by the EPA.
I have to ask, have you ever been to a property where it is done right? Has there ever been an instance where, like, you know what, actually they did a good job here?
Some, yes. But so the consideration is that the homeowners, if they are on top of this with environmental concern, their focus is lead, because that's the only thing that the limited testing by UCLA or CAP-LA or USC provided. They focus on lead. They're not aware of, they don't have the knowledge of the other contaminants at play here, such as arsenic, beryllium, or molybdenum. So I find properties where the homeowner says, property's fine, I don't need to remediate it because the lead is only 50. The background average in LA is about 20 to 30 parts per million for lead. So just right there, if your lead is 50, you know something's wrong. Only a few inches were cleared instead of 6. But I also see metals that I associate with industrial fires or EV or electric vehicles. What the hell happened there? So
right.
there's very limited knowledge.
So are they not testing for those? Like, as part of them clearing the property, they're not testing for those other contaminants? Is that standard or not? Is it you have to ask for it?
Well, what happened initially, again, there was no oversight by the federal government or the state to test properties.
They just contracted it out?
None. No, there was initial due diligence. You saw some air monitors on the street corners so they could have some publications for basic due diligence, but there was no testing of every property like there was in many properties in Hawaii during the Lahaina fire, right, or in Paradise. None. So if the homeowner chooses to get testing, subsequent soil testing after the fire was over, it's usually it's free testing through USC or UCLA, and it's almost always lead only. So the other metals were typically neglected.
They don't test for it.
No, and it tends to be students doing the testing. God bless their hearts. They don't have the chemistry.
Well, I mean, these are people's lives. That's the thing. So what is essentially the worst case scenario of what we're talking about here? Sort of baseline and doomsday, like worst approach, right? Let's say somebody rebuilt on top of a property that they didn't bother actually testing themselves, that the government gave them a little certificate saying, yep, nothing to see here, everything's clear, which it sounds like was done in many cases or most cases. And they rebuild on contamination. What is the possible or likely outcome of that?
So the typical household, sounds like a roundabout answer, but I'm getting there.
No, it's fine.
The typical household, so-called cleared.
It's not an easy question to answer. I understand there's nuance, but...
The typical household cleared by the Army Corps or its vendors, the only area cleared was the immediate envelope of the building itself, the structure, the former structure, and underneath it. And that was cleared typically down to 3 inches. So that's 3 inches below the house, and that typically failed from my tests. The other areas of the property were not cleared at all, which means they were saturated with heavy metal, arsenic, hexavalent chromium, not only from that property that burned, but the electric vehicle charging stations from the cars on the property, Teslas, but also from the adjacent properties that were blowing at 100 miles an hour. All that saturated on the lawn. So those are the typical situations. If the property owner goes to rebuild, one, they're using non-hazmat contractors, my competitors, because there's no reason for a hazmat contractor if it's been cleared, which means those other companies that rebuild the property are now being exposed to hazardous waste. That affects those workers exposed to respiratory hazards.
So it's like a double compounding effect here. So not only was it not clean, now that they say that it was clean, they have some other group coming in that even is like they're not protected either, and they're doing stuff that they shouldn't be doing.
They don't know though. They don't know because
this is terrible.
They have been led to believe that the property is.
I mean, it's terrible for the workers.
Yeah, it is.
I mean, they're going to have problems. Sounds like.
Then they're moving dirt. They're moving it around the property, blowing it up in the air because it is, to their knowledge, just dirt. That is not the case. Then they export it to landfills. So places where I or an engineering company like me would previously get clean dirt are now bringing in hazardous dirt because it's all been mixed up together. LA County and the state compelled our landfills to accept hazardous waste that they did not want to take. Calabasas landfill, where I shipped hundreds of tons of hazardous waste, they pushed back against the state saying, we don't want to take asbestos. We don't want to take this crap because next year, California, you're going to start citing us for having hazardous waste. They lost that battle in the courts. They were forced to accept that waste. So now, places like that, clean dirt landfills, they're sharing all this dirt. Contractors are putting this dirt on this property and they're doing all these different projects. And I've tested properties that brought in clean dirt and it's worse than it was before.
Sounds like another disaster.
It is.
Okay, so let's kind of catch up in my brain of what's happening here. You know, Ronald Reagan, the worst, 9 words, I'm from the government, I'm here to help, right? Shows up and says, okay, Army Corps of Engineers, they don't have capacity, so they sub out to undocumented folks and things like that. They get there and they're doing
contractors.
They do. So yeah, the workers themselves are subjected to hazardous waste and God knows what, and unfortunately will most likely suffer consequences later in life. The work that's done is only done by 3 inches instead of 6, and it's only on the actual area of a home, not on the surrounding area, the front lawn, the backyard, the sides. No. Then they get a little piece of paper saying a certificate. Then they have another person that comes, they move dirt. Dirt goes to a regular landfill because it's been forced to do so. They think they're building their dream home back again, or speculators or whatever. They're building on top of stuff that we don't test for by people who are done for free and nonprofit. They're just looking for one indicator versus other indicators. And this is all happening in real time as the dirt's now being shipped to other places as infill, right? Yeah. But it's contaminated dirt, but nobody knows it, but they should because of what's happening.
Yeah. And the landfills don't have the knowledge to test for all the different parameters that I would test as a chemical engineer. So they check for lead, but everything else fails, and I don't know about it until I get the import dirt.
So you know how they say smoking can cause cancer?
Yeah.
If you live in a property, and I understand where people are kicking up dust. I mean, look, I would hate to be in a home, because I come to think of it, you know, my kids play in the backyard. I don't think I've ever thought to test the backyard for whatever's back there, right? I just, bought a house, and it looks safe to me. Wouldn't even come across my mind. Somebody moving back into a brand new home, but let's assume for a moment all these contaminants are there, and they're in the topsoil in the back, topsoil in the front, and on the sides, and underneath the structure itself. And around them is the same condition, but different, let's say different levels at different houses. What is the likelihood of that individual having some sort of negative health outcome as a result of this?
Significant. So you'll have children playing on the front lawn, pets tracking that dust and debris back in the house. So that's asbestosis exposure risk, berylosis from beryllium. Arsenic is a respiratory hazard. It embeds in the cavities of the lungs. I've been coughing ever since the disaster. Even when I'm sick or not sick, it just keeps happening. So those risks are ongoing and permanent. And it really remains to be seen how that will affect the asset value of these homes, because in the beginning, a lot of people just wanted to flip their homes and sell them.
Right.
People on Via de la Paz Street, those are $30 million homes, were selling their lots for $800,000, a blank lot, because they just knew they had to get out of there before people start realizing what's going on. Now, everybody has to test everything. Then it's contaminated, so it's on the homeowner before he sells the property to clean it or decontaminate it. And the Army brought in 50,000-pound excavators and destroyed the driveway and just left. So that repair and that disposal is on the homeowner as well. Insurance will not cover it because they're not covering any soil remediation because it's already been cleaned. Why would they cover that? So
what a failure of the insurance system in California. I mean, what is someone to do if you own a property and you're in, I think it's only 17 permits and they were already pulled before the fire. I forget what, I don't want to misquote it, but essentially it's slow going, right? Yes. I mean, there's a lot of departments and it's hard to get things going. What should somebody do? I mean, like this, I'm connecting the dots and it sounds very dire and it doesn't sound like, I guess, let me ask you another, if I can, before I ask you this question. Does the government know about what we're talking about up until this point? Is there willful disregard for the facts and they're just papering over this, or are there people in discussions about this problem today?
They have to be aware of it. I mean, the chemistry is there, the science is there. So again, USC, UCLA, Cap LA, they provided this documentation. You have town hall meetings every week in Altadena. Then that community is now aware of what's going on. The pressure is there. The politicians are either silent or they just don't know how to deal with it. They blame Trump for, threatening to pull funding from California. I mean, the news recently said that Trump threatened to pull recovery funding from California yet again. I don't understand these political machinations, but it's a disaster again, and it's going to burden the homeowners.
And I mean, look, my understanding is they can't even get a piece of legislation to exempt their property taxes.
Yeah.
For some reason, we're charging them. I think we're lowering the value of the home because the home's not there. So thank you for that. Yeah. But you're still having to pay for the contaminated land because the government needs their money. So it doesn't seem to be much relief.
None.
From the homeowners, from the city, the county, and the state at this juncture.
And the homeowners are getting nuisance violations for the weeds that are growing, right? Weeds are the only thing.
Hold on a second. Now you're getting me worked up. They're getting citations for weed?
They're getting constantly. Malibu, Palisades, Altadena, they're getting citations that they have weed growth. So it's nice that you have inspectors to go around and cite property owners about weed growth on their land when the weeds are the only thing containing the dust from going airborne at this moment. So the homeowner should urgently hire Hispanic workers to blast all that stuff in the air without any protection on. Is that what you're saying? It's very interesting to see how this unfolds. And in Altadena, forgive me, the water supplies are governed by very, very small local corporations. So what happens is you have LADWP come out, but they don't have any expertise to do it. It's subcontracted out to local private corporations, semi-private, and they don't have any money to rebuild on behalf of the homeowners to provide water and sewer lateral infrastructure. So they're charging the homeowners who lost their homes to rebuild.
Yeah. I think one of the problems that comes to mind is someone hires you clean up the land, but if they bring in topsoil, they could be potentially bringing in contaminated soil.
It could be.
Okay, and then
very well be.
And then I spend money cleaning my property, but nobody else around me does, and over time that stuff's going to get over to my side.
Yeah. So the typical response that I provide for homeowners is we do soil testing or we defer to another party, and we're a fifth of the cost of industrial hygienists who are profiteering off of all the testing in the Palisades.
Well, that's the other thing. There's a lot of fraud. Yeah. Talk to me a little bit about that. Well, finish this thought, and then we'll talk about that.
So we do this. We offer soil testing, or we defer to a third party. All of our labs are third party, so there's no conflict of interest. Depending upon how acute those toxic levels are, we remove 3 inches or 6 inches of select areas, depending upon their budget. If they want, we import dirt that is clean dirt to the best of our knowledge, and we replace it with mulch and landscaping to suppress the dust to prevent airborne dispersal. And then we test the soil again to hopefully hand it over to the homeowner and make sure that it is livable for their children. If they cannot afford that scenario, we advocate very heavy concrete or hardscape placement, or constructing a home or an ADU on top of that to hold the dust down. That's how we approach this.
So the choice is sort of if you want a yard, you got to go clean it up, essentially, right? And if you can't afford it, concrete over it.
Yeah. The issue is preventing it from going airborne. Of course, there's heavy mercury contamination in the Palisades from the electric vehicles, et cetera, industrial fires. So that leaches into the groundwater, which leaches into the ocean. Those things are not prevented by this method that I'm describing.
So, I mean, this sounds shocking and sad. And I know that early on there were a lot of profiteers. Yeah. Tell me a little bit about that environment and what you're seeing then and now.
So, in the beginning, property owners were very impatient, particularly in the Palisades. They said, I have money. I'm a demo contractor myself. I'll demo my own damn home. Forget the government. So you saw a lot of properties that had demolition going on already.
They're just doing it.
And my clients to be would call me saying, why aren't you here helping me? They're doing it. My neighbors are doing it. I said, I'm not willing to do that illegally to burn you as a homeowner, nor myself. So you had a lot of that profiteering going on, people coming in.
They just show up and do it. Again, no coverage, no protection.
And then that property owner would email me 8 months later saying, I can't close the permit because we didn't have a hazmat contractor. Can you just sign off for me? Like, I'm not going to prostitute myself out like that. No disrespect. So that homeowner was burdened by that process. And I said, I warned you. You need hazmat contractors who actually understand the process.
That way the government knows you did it correctly, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So then profiteering. Industrial hygienists that's a certification that basically requires a college degree in science and a state certification. They're smart people, but 90% of them that I meet have no knowledge of hazardous waste at all because they focus primarily on mold and indoor environments. They have no knowledge of hazardous waste, how to respond to it, how to treat it, how to remediate it. But insurance companies, for some reason, insurance companies always want to save a penny everywhere they can, except with hygienists. They're gospel. So hygienists would come in, they would charge $6,000 to $8,000. They would do 30 or 40 samples that are absolutely irrelevant to a fire. Then they would present a document to insurance, and the homeowner would basically be mandated to clean this up at his own expense. Then the hygienist would call his restoration friends. Restoration contractors typically have no contractor's licenses at all, and they would gut the whole house and make millions right next to me when I was doing this. That's profiteering to some extent.
Yeah.
They came up with this scheme called char and soot testing. Now get a load of this. So that's it is semi-scientific in the sense that you're checking for combustion byproducts on the surface. But what they would do, a lot of these hygienists, they would test all the wood in the home and they would say, my God, it has 4% char. You got to demo the house. It's toxic. Now, if you know how wood is treated to prepare it for construction, it's kilned, which means it already has 4% char in the process of production. So it's a complete scam, and the homeowner says, I can't return home. I'm going to die. It's nonsense. But they made millions doing this. So now you see it's going through the state assembly that we need to have actual oversight on who tests properties. And they're, of course, handing it to hygienists who are 6 times more than I am, and they don't really have any experience in hazardous waste.
Is this a bill right now in the state?
It is. They're trying to push it. You and I
should go up there and talk to some folks. I'm curious. They would want to hear this. Yeah.
There are people, LA Times, I've spoken to LA Times several times. I'm in there published in several different articles. LA Times was saying, this guy came out of the woodwork and he tested my property and he just wiped the wall and put it in a Ziploc bag. Like, that's what hygienists do. That's what we do.
Right.
You have to, the issue is understanding the chemistry and what implications that has for the actual hazardous waste response and the homeowner.
Yeah.
There's too much profit being involved.
Their name, it reminds me of like a dental hygienist. It's like, okay, you get your teeth cleaned, but you got to see your dentist, right? Your dentist is the one that knows about your mouth. But anyway, so you're the doctor, if you will, of this industry and how best to do it. You gave the best case scenario, which is taking care of your property, fully cleaning it, making sure that you've tested for everything that needs to be tested and have that all clear. And you said that there's an appetite for folks that now get it. Maybe they've tried cutting corners and like, okay, uncle, I need to do this. What in your mind, and I know you and I privately talked, because I like to, when I hear people explain complex problems that are sort of knowledgeable in their field that other people like myself have no knowledge of. But if you were king for the day, and I'm not even sure if it's a city of LA thing where if you were mayor or a governor or a president, but if you, let's say you were the General Patton and you were brought in by all 3 governments and said, we need to fix our problem. That makes sense. I mean, it's not like it's not an imagination, like actual what we can do. I mean, we've built bridges, the Golden Gate Bridge. We're a country that I like to think solves problems well and can rise to any occasion. What would you say the first 3 steps, maybe not all the way to the finish line, but what would you do differently today if you had the ability to make policy or make a change or make a law or make a systems change? What are the 3 things that stand out to you? We must fix, we must address this. And maybe not even the solution. If you could articulate we've discussed a lot of concerning things and I can't believe that's happening. But what are the 3 things that we should hey, we got our heads around this. We got to figure this out. Because at the end of the day, I don't want kids or parents who buy a home, have their kids play in the backyard, end up with cancer and other health problems as a result of this negligence of this person saying that and that person saying nobody being responsible for that site and the cleaning of that site. What would you say are the 3 big pillars or the 3 big things that got to be looked at and addressed and fixed?
Number one thing is you need to have government actually ensuring that the people on the ground are entirely trained and licensed in hazardous waste, not with some 8-hour training class, actual hazardous waste contractors. The people need to competently be observed, not only by LA County, LA City supervisors, but at the very least by safety supervisors, to ensure that laborers are being protected and the work is being done properly. There was none of that. There needs to be a vetting process where you are ensured who is actually on site doing the work. That's step one. Step two is to slow down. Homeowners and property owners do not want that, of course, because they want to return home. Government doesn't want that because they lost their wealthiest tax base when the Palisades burned. But this is not a process that should have happened in 6 months. It should have taken 2 or 3 years. You can see that now because half the city is still contaminated. Now what? This needs to go according to all the proper levels of due diligence and a proper cleanup.
And it's going to take a few years to do that.
Yes, it is. Simple as that.
Okay. I mean, does it mean they can't concurrently work on their building plans and all that sort of stuff while this is happening as well?
Yeah.
And what would you say another one would be?
It boggles my mind. This is an answer. It boggles my mind that this fire happened in an area of higher property value than any other fire in California history. It happened in an area that's more progressive and more socially and environmentally aware and should be more concerned about the impacts of the fire. And yet all of that was dismissed and no testing was done. Why? So the question in my mind is, who calls the shots? Who dropped the ball here? That is the way to address it. Is it the president and FEMA's responsibility to intervene and be on the ground? I think his capacity to do so is limited in that regard. The most immediate person in charge would be the LA City Mayor, LA County Board of Supervisors. They're right here. That's their tax base. Those are people who are displaced. There was no interaction between those two entities. So
you're talking about the county and the city?
There was nothing.
Yeah, I saw that there were like text exchanges and different things where they're like arguing who's responsible for what, right?
Yeah. No, there's a disaster response center where, of course, the homeowners went there primarily concerned about how do I rebuild? How do I get a permit? When is the Army coming? There was no actual education in the consequences of fire from a hazardous waste standpoint.
Okay, so that to me, I think, is a clear indication of a failure, right, of systems. And I will say, I was part of a panel for like post-COVID, like what did we learn? How do we do it better? Putting some of the things that we did during that time, and if God forbid, if it ever happens again, probably we should approach things a little bit differently. Do you think people are waking up to what you're talking about? Is it widely known and talked about, or is it we're just scratching the surface?
My exposure is that the majority of Palisades is either apathetic or just moving on. Altadena, as I said, there's simmering fury. There's just rage, there's anger, there's resentment, there's bitterness. It's taken on a racial component. You can see a lot of billboards in front of burned homes saying Black Homes Matter. There's a lot of resentment there, and it's unearthing a lot of baggage. So there seems like there's some momentum going, but I don't see it in the Palisades as much as there should be, and I don't see a reciprocal dialogue from state or county saying, here's the next step, be wary of hazardous waste. Altadena just put out signs saying, this is a fire zone, watch out for respiratory hazards. It's a red sign in the corner back towards Eaton Canyon. Where's the education going on? So it's been left up to private or semi-private entities like Soil Safe, LA Compost, various private apparatuses going around educating people, UCLA, USC. It shouldn't be that way. Everyone in these disaster zones, that's over 18,000 people, should be educated that there are byproducts of the fire that have not and cannot or will not be remediated according to what we've provided.
Do you know if any open space like parks or city open spaces have been tested and remediated?
Yeah, we were the chief environmental consultant for Eaton Canyon. Those are the nature trails up there. We tested the Charles White Park, Loma Alta Park, several of them. Altadena, which is not a city, it's not incorporated.
That's part of the county, yeah.
That did have some due diligence, and they did come to us and other companies looking for environmental stewardship. Palisades, very little. Of course, that's not technically a city either. It's part of Los Angeles. There was nothing. Malibu, I know many people in the political realm there, and there is awareness. Malibu has a history of feeling resentful that they're not given the same kind of equal consideration that LA is.
Sure, because they're a smaller city.
There's that bitterness there, but it basically they got nothing.
And then if, is this B with $1 billion? Like, is this like a state action, like when they had the excise with the battery plant explosion, right? And they had to go clean up everybody's lots, and they're still doing it, by the way.
My dad did that.
Your dad worked on?
Contracted.
Okay, so
no comment.
But it took the state stepping in with funds to mitigate and help homeowners or the property. Like it was like, hey, we're going to take care of it. Yes, it was this company that did it, but like we've got to come in. Department of DTSC. They were essentially given like a block grant to go handle it. Is there anything like that happening for either one of these fire zones?
No. So
and why not? Like what are you hearing?
What you're describing is called a super fund. So we were contracted at most super funds in California. So those are the worst of the worst. Those are sites that are so contaminated, typically by private entities, that they necessitate federal direct oversight and funding. Now, we have several super funds where the government intervened to stop a polluter from going out of business, and they've been paying for the damages ever since. That's very common. You don't see that here.
Well, there's no company to deal with,
but
although I would say the city bears some responsibility. There wasn't any water. There wasn't a response. So all this fire, the report, there was a fire. They didn't put it out, and then it came back. I mean, all that stuff. So could there be something like that in your mind that would help alleviate a lot of the problems that we're discussing?
There should be, because in the most immediate sense, what I see is thousands of homeowners on the hook for paying damages that they're dealing with now. So that's, again, the driveways are completely destroyed by the Army. Who do you report that to? They have trees, family heirlooms that have been completely knocked down. Who do you report that to? The homeowners ask me this all the time. I said, I don't know. All those guys are gone. All those contractors moved back up north. There's no one to talk to. You can't call LA City and ask for a refund. Like, who pays the damage? It's the property owners. Who's going to remediate the soil? The property owners. There needs to be some kind of state alleviation of those damages.
Because I feel
the state did step in to fund the Army cleanup. The Army was funded not only by the homeowners insurance, but by the feds and by the state and by LA County in various capacities. There was that's an admission of some responsibility. Edison as well. Where are the homeowners from this point forward? With all the thousands of dollars in expenses they have now.
Well, and I'm reading and seeing that people have no choice because they can't pay for it. And so they're selling their house that was worth a lot more for pennies on the dollar.
Or they can't sell it.
It because of the contamination.
We have some properties in Malibu that, they go home and they say that I have headaches. I feel nauseous every time I'm there. And some of that's psychosomatic. Half of the homeowners.
Well, they're victims. I get it. Like
But I went there and I'm like, man, I've been around this stuff my whole life. I feel like crap too. Something's wrong. Now, as a person with chemistry knowledge, unlike industrial hygienists, etc., I know what to test for. So the insurance brought out hygienists to test for heavy metals, lead, right? Because those things can be cleaned by restoration companies by wiping it down. I said, I know this is something else. I know it's furans, I know it's dioxins and PCBs. Problem is, I refuse to test for those things unless I know it's the only way to help you with your insurance company to get you a livable home, right? Those tests are $900 a pop. That's my out-of-pocket to the lab per sample to test for PCBs, $900. So I don't do that unless I know something's there. So there are several homes in Malibu we have where the heavy metals are nothing, no big deal. Those tests are off the charts. So I was able to furnish a document to the insurance company saying this house is unlivable. It needs to be demolished. Not cleaned, not remediated by an insurance company. Demolished, and you need a hazmat contractor like me to do it. Is a federally recognized carcinogen.
I had another friend whose house was intact but completely unlivable. You walk in, you'd be like, it's a normal house, but it's not even a smell, it's like a feeling. I don't know, it's weird, but it was like this, I don't know. Okay, so this has been awesome. I really appreciate this. I would like, I'll just say this now. I think that bill, it would be interesting to talk to the sponsor and some of the people that are doing that, and maybe having a little bit wider aperture on what professional services look like and how best to remediate it. James, if somebody wanted to get a hold of you, and I guess let me ask you, if I'm a homeowner and I'm listening to this and I'm thinking, you know what, I want to know what's going on with my property. What are the steps? How does it take? And if you feel comfortable enough, like general, like depending on where you are and what phase of your insurance discussions versus all that sort of stuff. Can you kind of paint a picture of how they can work with you, how they can make contact with you, and what can they expect?
Well, a lot of companies say we're large enough to solve the problem, but small enough to care. That is actually true because I tend to be personally involved in almost every project in the Palisades. I live in Long Beach. It takes 2 hours to get to Palisades, but it's just right there geographically. So if you call us or go on our website, mayfieldenv.com, we can start discussing pictures, portions of your property that are sentimental to you, or that's where you envision your children to spend time with the new pool or the new play area. That's an area where it does warrant the cost and the expense incurred on you for soil testing. With that, we can go through the chemistry together, go through the levels, provide a few options about how to affordably and factor this into your budget for remediation. Compare that with the cost of your rebuild, which is going to be immense, right? Of course, the delays of you being in an Airbnb for several months while you've been evicted from your home by the disaster. So we provide different options that work for you. And if it's too expensive, we kind of factor that into your rebuild, saying you need to build something, you need to engineer something like pavement or asphalt on top of it to hold the contaminants down. I'll go out there myself and we talk through the options and allow you to return home safely. We work with your insurance company, whatever it takes.
So it's like a consultation over the phone with the Google Maps or pictures?
Oh, yeah, free estimates. Oh, yeah.
Okay, great. All right, well, that's helpful. And I want to just thank you for taking the time to talk me through some of the things that you and I already talked about. And I found it really interesting. I don't have the answer. I think hopefully through this dialogue, we've brought up more questions that need to be talked about. And I certainly, to the extent that I invite anybody, whether they're elected officials or community members, who want to maybe have a round table, let's do that. I think I want to be able to, as a part of the apartment association that represents property owners in Southern California, including Palisades and the other impacted areas, we represent property owners and we want them to at least be knowledgeable and informed about what their options are and what their choices are. So James, listen, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. Great insight. And maybe I can have you back on and we can, based on some of the feedback that we get, we can answer questions and bring maybe another guest on with you as well. Is that all right?
I appreciate the opportunity. I'm honored to be here.
All right. This is John Edmond here on behalf of the Apartment Association of California's Southern Cities. Thank you, James, for your time. Greatly appreciate it.
Thank you.
And we're out.